Welcome to another segment of the celebration of the Battle of Plattsburgh, the Battle of Plattsburgh weekend, with many events taking place in the North Country. And we've been not quite at this section of this field before, but very close by, because near here is the famous Dewey Tavern, which played a significant role in the Battle of Plattsburgh in the War of 1812. These very fields where we stand today were covered with tents and various kinds of encampments as the soldiers camped here on their way down to get involved in the land portions of the battle, which you've heard so much about. Today, this is a multifaceted celebration. We're celebrating the life of our good friend, the late Bob Venn, who preceded our little corner with a great program of his own, of which he recorded well over 500 segments. And that program was called What's Going On Here? And I remember when I worked in the radio station in Plattsburgh all those years, Bob came down with Calvin and did a long segment there. And we got to know each other very well. And he was a great friend of the North Country and many of the people gathered here. And as you can see, if I want to stand over and take a look at the sign, this is the future site of the Bob Venne Park. And so people who are interested in that, and members of the area media and family members, including Teresa Venn, are gathered here this afternoon to do a little recreation of something that was read down at the Legion in Plattsburgh many years ago, like 43 years ago, 42 years. God was giving me the sign. 42 years ago, and you'll hear more about it when Calvin introduces it to the group here today. So I hope you enjoy it.
I'm Calvin Castine. I'd like to welcome everyone here today. And as Gordy said, we're here to pay tribute to a good friend of mine, Mr. Bob Venn. And I feel very privileged over the years to have worked with Bob Venn and with Gordy Little. And I can't think of two people who could have been more fun and could have had better times with than those two individuals. But we're here also as part of the celebration for the Battle of Plattsburgh. And with that thought, I'd like to read something that I prepared here. We are here today for the first of what we hope will be an annual observance of the Battle of Plattsburgh in the part that nearby Dewey Tavern and the surrounding grounds played in this significant historic event. The importance of Dewey Tavern has long been well documented. The Pictorial History of Clinton County, a 220-plus page book prepared by the Clinton County Historical Association for the bicentennial year of 1976, states the most historic building still standing in the county is Elias Dewey's Tavern from about 1800 in Champlain, which hosted military leaders from both sides of the War of 1812 and where treaties for exchanging prisoners of war were negotiated. Noted local historian, the late Allen S. Everest, in his book Pioneer Homes of Clinton County from 1790 to 1820, used Dewey Tavern on the cover of that book and points out that both the British and American officers stayed at Dewey's during the War of 1812. Andrew Broadwell, in the April 1975 edition of North Country Notes, states, in September of 1814, the war came to this section in earnest. 14,000 British troops marched down from Canada with their Indian allies and the Voltigeurs. About half came down the Odelltown Road and camped at Dewey's, the officers in the house and the soldiers in the fields all around the house. The Indians took up positions just south of the barns. The next morning, probably around September 6th or 7th, the British troops moved out of Dewey's toward Plattsburgh. If we could pause for a moment and just imagine the sight of that. 7,000 plus troops camped on these grounds around here from where we're standing now all the way over to probably to Prospect Hill and in front of the school. And what a sight that must have been back then. These were 7,000 young soldiers who were probably already war-weary from battling Napoleon's troops. 7,000 soldiers, many about to die on this foreign soil 3,000 miles from their home. If given a choice, few, if any, would have chosen to be here on this fateful journey. Mr. Broadwell continues, on the recent battle, on the retreat from the Battle of Plattsburgh, many wounded soldiers were brought in and cared for at Dewey's Tavern. They arrived in ox carts, wooden sleds, or whatever means of conveyance were available. Those who died were buried on the place in or near the family cemetery just southeast of the house. And talking today with Louis and Rita Bedard, they pointed out that in this, probably around in this cornfield, right across from Northeastern School, there was an old cemetery there. And these soldiers were brought back here, the wounded ones, they stayed here at Dewey Tavern, and the ones who died were buried over there. Those British soldiers left their families behind. They fought and died for their nation and deserve the same recognition that we hope for and expect if it were members of our own families. We must never get so caught up in the glory of victory that we forget the sacrifices that were suffered on both sides. I think it'd be a worthy project for us if we thought about someday in the future probably finding that cemetery and seeing that it's properly marked. Before I introduce Jay Montpelier, I also want to take a moment to announce a project that the Bob Venne Park Incorporated Committee is extremely excited about. And that is that during the year 2000, we'll be sponsoring a publication of a book that we are tentatively calling Champlain 2000. We hope Channel 5 won't get upset with us if we use that Champlain 2000, but we expect this book to be around a long time after people have forgotten what's going on this year in the local area. This Champlain 2000 book will be looking to publish photos of every family in the town of Champlain, including the 2 villages. This will be a monstrous publication which will have tremendous historical significance. We'll be coming out with our exact plans in the next few weeks, but we did want to make mention of this now so people can start making plans to be included in this book. But please don't contact us. We'll be making an announcement on this very shortly. And with that, I'd like to introduce Jay Montpelier, the president of Bob Venne Park Incorporated.
Hello, I'm Jay Montpelier, president of the Bob Venne Park, and I want to thank everybody for coming here today. And what we're going to do here is introduce first the Bob Venne Park Committee. And here we have Norm Bono, the vice president of the park, and we have Mr. Long, who's a committee member, and Mary Rasko, who's our acting secretary right now. And of course, Mr. Cameraman there, Calvin Castine, we don't want to forget him, who's been playing a very big part in this. We just applied for a grant, and it looks very good, and everybody on the committee worked very hard, so I think everybody should be watching for that soon. It looks really good. I'd like to introduce the family here. We have Teresa Venne, and we have her son, Tom Venne, a little bit of stuttering there, and his daughter, Sierra, and his son, Robert. And we have Bob's daughter, Sue Belrose. And we have the original property owners, Louis Bedard and his wife, the Deweys. And I think we covered everybody. And I would like to introduce Gordy Little, our guest speaker today. Thank you.
Well, our viewers and those people gathered here may know that I'm rather well known for being long-winded, but even I will cut something down in the interest of time and utter boredom for people who are gathered here or viewing. But I do want to mention that parts of this speech that I'm going to read for you this afternoon are extremely significant. As a matter of fact, the title of this little piece is The Significance of the Battle of Plattsburgh, and it is historic in itself. It is an address which was delivered upon the occasion of the first official observance of the Battle of Plattsburgh Day. It was written and presented by a gentleman well known to many standing here today and many of our viewers, John Ross, who was at the time the historian of Rouse's Point. The occasion of this speech was the luncheon of the United States United Service Clubs of the city of Plattsburgh at the American Legion home in Plattsburgh. You know where that was at the time. On September 11th, Battle of Plattsburgh Day, 1957. It was printed and distributed by the Battle of Plattsburgh Day Commission, October 1958. I told you I've shortened it for this, what we hope will be a momentous occasion here at the site of the Bob Venne Park. I tried it at home and it took 25 minutes to read, so we'll try to shorten it to about 10 and hope we can keep you all awake. It's a very important piece, and if you listen to the words, I think you too will realize how significant, just how significant this battle was, and why many of us are working very hard to let the world know how significant the Battle of Plattsburgh was, and we're working very hard to show how significant this ground that we're standing on was in connection with it. The Battle of Plattsburgh was fought on September 11th, 1814, and resulted in a decisive victory for the United States. Although the land forces of the United States that defended the south bank of the Saranac River allowed Sir George Prevost's attacking British troops only one small crossing of the river, the decisive battle was actually waged on the waters of Cumberland Bay, where the United States vessels commanded by Thomas Macdonough defeated a powerful British fleet commanded by George Downey. This is not primarily a history of the battle itself. That story's been told many times. Here we'll stress the significance of the battle, what it means and meant to the people of the United States and the nations of Europe. The Battle of Plattsburgh was not a great battle in terms of the number of men involved. It was not a great battle in terms of the number of hours of combat. It was not a great battle in terms of dead and wounded. Its greatness lies in the completely decisive effect it had on Great Britain's plans to divide and conquer the United States. Admiral Mahan, the great U.S. naval tactician and writer of naval history, rated the Battle of Plattsburgh as one of the few truly decisive naval battles of all time. Many naval battles have been won or lost, yet few have had the decisive effect in determining the outcome of a war as did the Battle of Plattsburgh. The War of 1812 was more than 2 years old when Macdonough won his victory on Cumberland Bay. In those 2 years, the tide of battle and of the war itself had not favored either side, and no clear-cut decision had been achieved by either side. The British determined in 1814 that they'd undertake an expedition through the Champlain Valley that would, they hoped, bring the war to a rapid close and their arms to victory in North America. The expedition got as far as Plattsburgh. A clear-cut decision was achieved, but the decision was against the British forces. The British defeat at Plattsburgh practically ended the War of 1812 and provided victory for the United States. At no time during the War of 1812 was the United States in such danger as it was when Sir George Prevost and his men arrived at the north bank of the Saranac River early in September 1814. The dire threat to the nation reached its peak on September 11th, when the British attack was launched. In every military category, the British had superiority. 3 hours after the attack began, the peril to our nation was ended. A young naval officer with a makeshift crew had saved his country. Few, if any, wars were ever decided in such a final, incontestable way as was the War of 1812 by Macdonough's victory. At the time of the battle, the British were so certain of their ultimate victory that they were preparing peace terms that would have reduced the United States to virtual dependence on Great Britain. Had the British achieved the victory they expected would be theirs, the United States would have been forced into a position where it would have to accept any peace terms that were offered. Macdonough's victory at Plattsburgh permitted the United States to negotiate a treaty at Ghent from a position of strength and caused the British negotiators to withdraw their onerous proposals. What they thought was a weak and defeated nation sat down at a conference table a victor. Suddenly, the people of the United States were a united nation. The fears and doubts that had prevented unity ever since the close of the Revolution were laid away as they closed their ranks and joined together as one people unified and inspired by the knowledge that this infant nation could meet and defeat the powerful forces of a great European nation. The unity that has made the United States the great nation it is today did not begin to grow and flower into economic and political stature until the pulse of all its citizens began a steady, coordinated beat. After victory at Plattsburgh allowed us to negotiate as equals at Ghent. Macdonough's victory was the catalyst that brought this unity to our nation and put its people on the path of their highest destiny. This unifying action is the most significant and important result of the Battle of Plattsburgh. Dissension had divided the nation since the close of the Revolution. The shaky semblance of unity that had won that struggle for independence evaporated when the war was over. Patriotism was at an ebb. Individuals struggled for power, and the affairs of the nation as a whole were largely ignored by those in power in government. One significant lesson to be learned from the Battle of Plattsburgh is that a force of free men, though inferior to their attackers in numbers, will defend their home and nation with tenacity and singleness of purpose. Every man in the American force was determined to win the battle if possible and to continue the fight until it ended in victory or death. Even the sick and wounded who had been evacuated to Crab Island were determined to fight should the opportunity arise. The professional soldiers of the British invading army were hired hands and lacked the inspiration of any such patriotic fervor as inspired and actuated the defenders. It is not the least significant fact regarding the Battle of Plattsburgh that one-time enemies now live in friendship and amity. To those who view their neighbors with hate and distrust, the lesson to be learned from our experience here promises hope of better understanding and better international relations in the future. What we have achieved in the United States and Canada, they too can hope to achieve in the years ahead, as we have done along the Richelieu and Lake Champlain. The warpath of the nations, they can also do to bring peace and the fellowship of man to a troubled world. Louis's not nearly old enough to be the original owner of this property, as Calvin pointed out, but he certainly is the present owner, and we're glad to have him with us to help us celebrate today, the past owner. And he was the guy who mowed the lawn so we could be here today, so we have to give him special credit. I love surprises, Louis. You know, I love surprises.
Well, that's okay. Well, as I say, my wife bought me a new lawnmower, and I wanted to try it out in that tall, wet grass. So I ran down the road here about 30 miles an hour and put it on high gear, and in 5 minutes that was all done.
I heard you race the cops from the corner, huh?
That's right.
And won. And he didn't take a nick out of the new blade on it yet either, right?
No, it's still in good shape.
How does it feel to have had this association with this property, with all this great history here?
Well, I don't know. This whole bit here kind of comes as a dream to me, because I would have never realized 2 years ago that all this was happenings, and I'm sure to all of us it's kind of something that's being put together as it comes along, and it's you know, we never thought this would be realized just a couple of years ago. And I think as far as I'm concerned, I think this is the best thing. A park is the best thing to do for this piece of land here. I can't think of anything better, you know.
What a great way to remember our friend Bob Venn. And you know, you spoke about dreams. This is a great dream. Back in when the Battle of Plattsburgh was fought in those days, we had a young nation with a dream. And if it hadn't been for the Battle of Plattsburgh and the association this property had with it, we may have had a different dream that came true back in those days.
That's right.
But here we are today. And as I said before, since I was a very small child, I always loved surprises. I can remember that little green stocking hanging over the fireplace as a child, and in those days you didn't get 15 presents under the tree. If you got a jackknife and an orange, that was big time. But you never know what was in there until you got up on Christmas morning. Now you almost blew the surprise before it was time, but you did bring something that you found. Now it's time to unveil it.
Right. Well, I've read the history and about Mrs. Dewey leaving a bag of money in the well, dropping it in the well before she had to leave the property and headed for Malone. And I've been looking for that money ever since.
The Dutchman's gold, huh?
I did 3 wells and I haven't found it. I don't know if somebody got to it before I did. But the only thing I found, the only treasure I found is this. While I was digging a ditch to bring water to the barn, this was buried in the ground about 3 feet.
Wow, how long ago did you find it?
It's about 4 years, I think.
Well, for those people who have no idea what this is, it's 1 cent.
It's 1 cent.
And I imagine it's worth at least 2 cents now, wouldn't you say?
I would think so.
Could you find a date on it?
Yeah, it's very plain. 1810.
It's plain to you. I'm old. 1810?
1810, and it was deep in the ground, and I think it must have been airtight, where it didn't.
Well, it's
decay.
well preserved,
Yeah,
except
that's right.
for the oxidation.
Yeah,
It's
but
beautiful. I'd have to get a powerful magnifying glass to read anything but 1 cent. Wait a minute. It's getting clear to me. Maybe this is a miracle.
I think you can read it.
Oh, isn't that great?
Yeah, it's very plain. It's way down in the ground.
So you put it inside forever and ever and ever.
Yeah.
Is that the only significant thing you found on this property?
Really, that's about all I could find. So far, I did a little bit of digging around, and we couldn't find anything. I imagine there are things that's buried in. Of course, if we knew everything that was under the ground, we'd probably be millionaires. If we
You know, that's true of Lake Champlain, too, and as part of this celebration, as if somebody up there was trying to say, now is the time. A few weeks ago, some people who were just happened to be walking along the surf, not very far from our beloved Scamotion Creek and not far from the city beach and up where the old dump was many years ago, some boards started coming up, and they dragged these boards ashore, and they saw that there were old hand-hewn nails in there, and somebody called me and said, what do we do about it? And we made a few phone calls and identified it ultimately as one of the original bateaux, believed to be from the War of 1812 era. And then just a very short time later, a boat, not a bateau, but a boat called a gig, but dating from the same time period, was found just a few hundred feet away. And just as if by another miracle, because we want to gear this celebration up, my friend Keith Herculow found a naval uniform button right in the side of the gunnel of that second boat, which was also identified to that time period. So it's interesting. When did you find that penny, did you say? How long ago?
I believe it's about 4 years ago. I had cattle, and I wanted to bring water from the house to the barn, and we dug a ditch, and it was right in the bottom. The bucket picked it up and left it on top of the dirt, and I saw this little round thing. And
there it was.
My wife cleaned it up, and you could see the date on it and everything. So
that's fantastic. Now, as if by another miracle, the skies are opening up, and we're going to get rained on if we don't get out of here. I want to thank everyone for being here today. Thank you all for your contributions, and maybe the next time we meet, we'll be one step closer to our dream of the Bob Venne Park.